Abandoned black twins asked a billionaire for leftovers. What he did next stunned everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a cold night in the city, the streets coated with the kind of chill that made your breath fog up with every step. A quiet, unremarkable evening for most, but not for two young children. Two black twins, barely 10 years old, stood near the back door of an upscale restaurant, their small hands pressed against the cold metal, their eyes scanning the busy street ahead. They were hungry, tired, and alone. Their clothes were torn, worn out from days of wandering the streets, and their shoes, barely more than rags, barely kept the cold out. Their mother, sick and bedridden for weeks, had not been able to care for them. Their father, gone from their lives long before they could even remember, had left them to fend for themselves. And tonight, like so many others, they had no choice but to seek the only thing that was left, leftovers. As they waited in silence, their stomachs growled. They were used to the cold, used to the hunger, but the emptiness of it all still gnawed at their souls. They had no home, no safety, only the street lights above them that flickered in the distance. The restaurant staff had seen them before, ignored them before. Tonight, though, they dared to approach the back door, hoping someone would take pity on them. Their request was simple: a meal, anything, even just the scraps from the leftovers of the wealthy patrons inside. But as they stood there, trembling in the cold, a figure approached. It was a man, tall and dressed in an immaculate suit, walking with the confidence of someone used to the world being at his feet. His face was stern, but something about the children caught his attention. He stopped, watching them for a moment. The twins, too proud to beg, stood silent, the cold air biting at their skin. And then, almost as if on impulse, the man walked over. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, yet tinged with a curiosity he couldn't quite explain. One of the twins looked up, her small voice barely a whisper. "We're hungry, sir. We don't have anywhere to go. Can you help us?" The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The man's expression softened, his eyes flickering with something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something unfamiliar. He glanced back at the restaurant, where the warm lights and laughter seemed so far away. A cold gust of wind blew through, making him shiver, but it wasn't the temperature that chilled him. It was the look in their eyes. Without saying another word, he motioned for them to follow him. They didn't question it. They just did, walking behind him, hoping, no, praying, that this wasn't just another empty promise. What would happen next? Would he offer them food? Or something more? Something that could change their lives forever? They had no idea, but for the first time in a long time, they dared to believe. The twins followed the man through the narrow alley behind the restaurant, their shoes scraping against the cracked concrete as they struggled to keep up. The night air was sharp, biting at their exposed skin, but they barely noticed it now. For the first time in weeks, their stomachs weren't the only thing that ached. They felt something else, a flicker of hope. The man led them through a side door into the warm interior of a grand, yet starkly quiet, kitchen. The contrast between the bustling restaurant they had just seen and the calm behind these walls was overwhelming. The twins stood frozen for a moment, taking in the polished surfaces, the stainless steel appliances, the soft hum of the refrigerators. They had never been inside a place like this before. The man turned to face them, his expression softening. "You're safe here. Stay close," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. The twins nodded silently, unsure of how to respond to the sudden kindness. They weren't used to being treated with care or attention. He walked over to a counter, where stacks of prepared food sat waiting to be served to customers. He grabbed a plate and began filling it with leftover food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables. He turned back to the twins. "You can eat. Don't be shy." They hesitated, glancing at each other. It felt strange. This wasn't the way things usually worked. Usually, they were told to leave, to go away, to stop bothering people. But this man was different. He was offering them food without asking anything in return. The girl who had spoken earlier, Maya, stepped forward first. Her small hands trembled as she took the plate, her eyes wide as she examined the food. It was so much more than they had expected, more than they had hoped for. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The man nodded, but didn't speak. He seemed lost in thought as he watched them take their first bites, their faces lighting up as the warmth of the food filled their empty stomachs. The boy, Eli, took longer to speak. He chewed slowly, savoring the taste. Finally, he looked up at the man, his voice uncertain. "Why are you helping us?" The man paused, as though the question caught him off guard. For a moment, it seemed like he was wrestling with an answer that didn't come easily. "I don't know," he said softly. "I just felt like I had to." Maya glanced at Eli, and then back at the man. She could see that there was something about him, something different. He wasn't like the others, the ones who looked away when they saw them begging or the ones who walked past without a second glance. This man seemed to understand something. Maybe not everything, but something. "Are you sure you don't want anything else?" the man asked, after a long pause, breaking the silence between them. Maya shook her head. "This is enough. More than enough." The man's gaze softened even more. "Good. You don't deserve to go without. No one should." It was then that Maya realized the truth. This man wasn't just offering food. He was offering them something bigger. Safety, maybe. Dignity, definitely. Something they hadn't known for a long time. He leaned against the counter, watching them quietly for a moment before speaking again. "Tell me your names." Maya blinked. "I'm Maya, and this is my brother, Eli." The man's eyes seemed to narrow slightly as if considering something, but he said nothing for a few moments. "Maya and Eli, you're not from around here, are you?" She shook her head, unsure how to explain. "No, sir. We don't have a home." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at the two of them for a long while. The silence between them stretched on, but this time, it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt like the weight of the world was slowly lifting, just a little. He finally broke the silence. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore," he said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment before Maya's heart skipped a beat. She turned her head to look at Eli, and then back at the man. "What do you mean?" The man's expression remained serious, but there was something softer in his eyes now. "I'll help you. Whatever you need." Maya didn't know how to respond. There were no words for what she felt in that moment. Relief, gratitude, disbelief. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice shaky. He smiled, though it was a small, sad smile. "You're welcome. Now, I think you two should get some rest. It's been a long night." He moved to a small door at the back of the kitchen and opened it, revealing a quiet, empty room. "You can sleep here for the night. I'll make sure you're taken care of." Maya and Eli looked at each other, unsure. But the promise of warmth, the chance to sleep without fear, made them nod. They were too tired to argue, too worn out to wonder if this kindness was real. For the first time in a long time, they felt something they hadn't dared feel in weeks: hope. The man stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter the room. Maya went first, followed closely by Eli. As they stepped inside, they felt the warmth of the room surround them. It was nothing grand, just a small cot, a blanket, and a chair in the corner. But to the twins, it felt like a luxury. They hadn't had a bed of their own in months. They hadn't had anything of their own in months. Now, in this moment, they were given more than just food. They were given a chance for something better, something they had almost forgotten could exist. Maya lay down on the cot, pulling the blanket up to her chin, feeling the softness against her skin. Eli curled up beside her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. For the first time in a long time, they both slept soundly, the weight of the world forgotten, if only for one night. The morning after their first night in the warm room, Maya and Eli awoke to the soft light of the sun filtering through the small window. For the first time in weeks, they weren't woken up by the sound of traffic or the biting cold of the streets. They were still in the same room, still under the same blanket, and the warmth was unlike anything they had ever known. Maya stretched slowly, her body sore from sleeping on the hard ground for so long, but the cot beneath her felt like a small luxury. Eli stirred beside her, yawning and rubbing his eyes. He sat up and looked around, his gaze settling on the quiet room. It was simple, but to them, it was everything they had dreamed of. For a moment, they didn't speak. They just took it all in, the stillness, the softness of the bed, the peace that surrounded them. Maya turned to Eli, her voice a whisper. Do you think this is real? Is this really happening? Eli didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her with wide eyes, as if unsure how to process the kindness they had been shown. I don't know, he said finally, his voice small. But it feels good. Maya nodded, her chest tightening with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. They had been abandoned, left to fend for themselves, but now they were here, in this safe place. The man who had helped them was a stranger, but his kindness felt more real than anything else they had experienced. The door to the small room opened softly, and the man appeared in the doorway. He smiled at them, his face warm and welcoming. Good morning, he said, his voice calm but full of care. I hope you both slept well. Maya and Eli both nodded, unsure of what to say. They had never had anyone ask them such a simple question with genuine concern. The man stepped into the room and placed a tray of food on the small table near the window. There were pancakes, eggs, fruit, and juice, food that looked so perfect it almost seemed unreal. I figured you both would be hungry, he said. I'll leave you to eat. Take your time. He turned to leave, but then paused, looking at them with a thoughtful expression. After breakfast, I'd like to talk to you both about something. Maya and Eli exchanged a glance, their curiosity piqued. What could he possibly want to talk about? The man had already done more for them than anyone had ever done, and yet there was something about his tone that made them wonder if he had something important to say. They ate slowly, savoring the food, not just because it was delicious, but because it felt like a dream. They had never tasted anything like this before. When they finished, they both stood and walked to the small living area where the man was waiting for them. He gestured for them to sit, and they did, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them. The man cleared his throat before speaking. I'm sure you're both wondering why I'm helping you. I don't know exactly why I felt the need to do this, but there's something about you too. Something that made me want to offer a little bit of help. Maya and Eli stayed silent, unsure of how to respond. The man continued, his voice steady. I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about how you don't have a home, and I know that's not something anyone should ever have to go through. So, I want to offer you both something that might help you, something that might give you a chance. Maya's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a knot form in her stomach. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man looked at her with kind eyes. I want to give you a place to stay. A real home. You won't have to sleep on the streets anymore. You won't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. You'll have everything you need. Eli's eyes widened in disbelief. But why? Why would you do that for us? The man leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. Because no one should have to live like that. Because everyone deserves a chance. And because I see something in both of you. Something that tells me you're stronger than you think. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked at Eli, who seemed just as stunned as she was. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But there was something in the man's eyes, something genuine, that made her believe it. You mean it? She asked, her voice shaking. The man nodded. Yes, I mean it. I'm not going to abandon you. You're not alone anymore. Maya couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she blinked rapidly to stop them from falling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. Thank you so much. Eli sat beside her, his own eyes glistening with tears. He reached out and took her hand. The man smiled at them, standing up from his chair. You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone should do when they see someone in need. He walked over to the door and paused, looking back at them one last time. Get some rest today. I'll take care of everything else. And tomorrow, we'll start figuring out the next steps together. As he left the room, Maya and Eli sat there in silence for a few moments. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel something they hadn't in ages, hope. They had been given a chance, a real chance, and somehow, they knew that things were finally going to change. The next morning, Maya and Eli awoke to a sense of calm that felt almost surreal. The events of the past few days still felt like a dream, but here they were, sitting in a warm room with a meal in front of them. There was a quiet stillness in the air, a feeling that everything had somehow changed overnight. They had not only been offered a place to stay, but they had been given something they had never known before, security. It wasn't just the bed, or the food, or the warmth of the room. It was the understanding that they didn't have to fight for their survival every day anymore. For the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel a little peace. The man, whose kindness had been a complete surprise to them, had kept his word. He hadn't just given them a roof over their heads. He had given them something far more valuable: hope. After breakfast, the man, whose name they still hadn't learned, came into the room to check on them. He seemed as calm and collected as ever, but there was a slight softness in his eyes when he looked at them. "How did you sleep?" he asked. Maya looked up from her plate, surprised at the question. It was a simple thing, but it made her realize just how much she had taken for granted in the past. People had rarely asked her how she felt, let alone whether she was comfortable. "Good," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. Eli nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it was nice." The man smiled, then sat down across from them. "I'm glad to hear that. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but things can be different now. You won't have to worry about where you'll sleep or what you'll eat anymore." His words hung in the air, settling in Maya's chest like a warm blanket. She had never imagined that anyone would care enough to offer them such a thing. "I'm sorry about your mom," the man continued, his voice softer now. "I know that's been hard for you both." Maya's heart tightened at the mention of her mother. She had been sick for so long, and Maya had spent more nights than she could count trying to care for her, hoping for a miracle that never came. "She's still in bed," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly. "She can't get out of bed. She can't do anything for herself anymore." The man nodded, his gaze sympathetic. "I understand. And I'll help her too. Whatever she needs." Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You would do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," he replied. "No one should have to face that kind of struggle alone. I'll make sure she gets the care she needs." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had said anything like that to her. She had always been the one taking care of others, always the one trying to make sure everything was okay. But in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, someone else cared enough to help her, to help them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. The man smiled at her, his expression kind. "You don't need to thank me. It's just what should be done. What anyone would do if they saw two children in need." He stood up, walking toward the door. "I'll make the arrangements for your mother. You two stay here, rest. I'll take care of everything." As he left, Maya and Eli exchanged a glance. It was almost too much to process. They had come from nothing, homeless, abandoned, and now, they were here, in this room, with someone who wanted to help. Maya stood up slowly, her feet still unsteady from the emotional weight of everything. She walked to the small window and looked out. The city stretched out before her, bustling with people who had no idea who she was or what she had gone through. But in this moment, that didn't matter. For the first time in what felt like forever, Maya felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Eli joined her by the window, his small hand resting on her arm. "Do you think Mom will be okay?" he asked quietly. Maya looked down at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and fear. "I hope so," she said softly. "I really hope so." But even as she said it, she couldn't help but feel that this new life they were being offered had already started to heal some of the wounds she had carried for so long. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. And for the first time, she felt like they might just have a chance at a real future. As the day went on, the man returned with good news. Arrangements had been made for her mother to get the medical care she needed. He had called a doctor, made appointments, and even arranged for her mother to be brought to a nearby clinic for a thorough checkup. Maya sat with Eli, listening to everything the man said, her heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and relief. She had never imagined this kind of help existed for people like her. "I'll check on her later today," the man said, his tone calm and reassuring. "But for now, you both should try to relax. Get some rest, take a breath. Things are going to be different now." Maya and Eli both nodded, but neither of them could quite believe it. It wasn't just that they had food, warmth, and safety now. It was that someone cared about them, cared enough to help. As the man left the room to handle the next steps, Maya sat on the bed, her mind racing with all the possibilities. This wasn't just a temporary fix. This was something real, something permanent. And for the first time in her life, Maya felt like she could finally start to dream about a future. A future where she didn't have to worry about survival, where she could be a kid again, where her mother could be well again. The weight of the world had lifted, even if just a little, and for the first time in so long, Maya allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days that followed felt like a dream that Maya and Eli were still trying to make sense of. They had settled into their new reality, a reality that was still hard for them to fully accept. Every morning, Maya woke up to the same feeling, a strange, peaceful stillness, unlike anything she had experienced before. The bed she slept in was soft, the food on the table was abundant, and the warmth inside the house was a welcome change from the cold, unforgiving streets they had known. But there was something else, something deeper, that they were still getting used to: the safety. It was a feeling that had been missing from their lives for so long, and now it was there, wrapped around them like a protective blanket. Eli seemed to be adjusting better than Maya, finding comfort in the simple things: playing with toys, watching TV, and eating meals without the worry of where the next one would come from. Maya, however, still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She couldn't forget the life they had left behind, the life where every day was a struggle. She still had trouble believing that they were truly safe now, that they wouldn't have to fight for everything. The man, who had been their savior and their protector, came by often. He would check in on them, ask if they needed anything, and make sure their mother's medical care was taken care of. It was clear he genuinely cared, but Maya couldn't help but feel like there was still some distance between them. He was kind, yes, but he was also a stranger, a man who had no obligation to help them. One evening, after the man had left for the day, Maya sat on the couch, her thoughts swirling. Eli was in the kitchen, making a mess with some peanut butter and bread, but Maya barely noticed. She couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to know more. She needed to understand why he had done what he had. Why had he taken them in? Why had he decided to help them when so many others had ignored them? She wasn't sure if she would ever get the answer she was looking for, but she had to ask. The next day, when the man returned, she decided to confront him. She waited until Eli had gone outside to play, and then she walked into the room where he was sitting, reading the newspaper. She stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering her courage before she spoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice steady but full of emotion. The man looked up from the paper, his expression softening. "What do you mean?" he asked, setting the paper down. "Why are you helping us?" Maya's heart raced as she spoke, but she had to know. "You don't even know us. You didn't have to take us in. So why did you?" The man sat back in his chair, considering her question. For a moment, he didn't speak, and Maya wondered if he was going to brush it off. But then, he sighed deeply, his eyes meeting hers. I guess I didn't realize it until recently, but I've been given so much in my life. Too much. And it made me forget what it was like to struggle, to fight just to survive. When I saw you too, I remembered. I remembered what it felt like to be lost, to have nothing." Maya blinked, surprised by his honesty. She had expected a vague answer, something that would make her feel like she was just another charity case. But this felt different. He wasn't trying to make her feel grateful. He was just explaining himself. "I couldn't stand the thought of you two going without," he continued. "I don't know why, but it felt wrong. So, I decided to help. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because everyone deserves a chance." Maya didn't know how to respond. She had been expecting some grand explanation, some reason why he was doing this. But the truth was simpler, and somehow, that made it all the more powerful. He didn't owe them anything. He was just choosing to help. "Thank you," Maya whispered, her voice catching. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "But you're welcome. You both deserve a chance to be happy, to be safe." Maya smiled, a small, tentative smile, but one that held more warmth than she had felt in a long time. "I don't know what we would have done without you," she said quietly. The man stood up, walking over to her and placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. I'll be here, and I'll make sure you both have everything you need." She nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She still couldn't quite believe that this was her life now. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, she knew that for the first time in a long time, she had someone who truly cared about her and Eli. And that was enough. Later that evening, after dinner, the man sat with Maya and Eli in the living room. It was a small thing, just watching TV together, but it felt like a family. A real family. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to let go of the fear and the uncertainty. She allowed herself to enjoy the peace that had been given to her. Eli was laughing, his face lit up by the glow of the television, and Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was what it felt like to belong. This was what it felt like to have a future. She looked over at the man, and for the first time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw someone who had helped her find hope again. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed to keep moving forward. As the night went on, and the quiet settled around them, Maya couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The following weeks felt like a new chapter in Maya and Eli's lives. They had settled into a routine that, at first, seemed foreign to them. Every day, they woke up in the same warm room, the sounds of the bustling city outside the window. A far-off hum. The man, whose name they had finally learned was Richard, continued to check in on them, ensuring that their mother was receiving the best care possible. He had arranged for her to see specialists and arranged a home nurse to tend to her. Slowly but surely, the pieces of their lives were falling into place. Maya felt a strange sense of stability, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Eli, on the other hand, adapted quickly, running around the house, playing with the toys Richard had bought for him. But there were still moments when Maya would catch herself staring out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. Despite the safety they now had, she couldn't shake the feeling of how quickly everything could change. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall buildings in the distance, Maya found herself in the living room, looking through the old photos Richard had kept on the shelf. Some of the pictures were of his family, others of places he had visited. But it wasn't the pictures that caught her attention. It was the family portrait in the corner, a photograph of a woman, standing beside a man, both smiling at the camera. She stared at the photo for a long time, her mind racing. There was something about the woman in the photo that seemed familiar. Her face, the way she smiled. Something about her reminded Maya of someone. Her mother. But how could that be? Richard had never mentioned having a family like hers. She felt her heart race as she turned the picture around. On the back was a name, written in neat handwriting, Ruth. She stared at the name, trying to place it, but nothing came to her. She couldn't remember her mother mentioning anyone named Ruth. But the feeling of recognition wouldn't go away. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Richard walked into the room, a smile on his face. "What are you up to?" he asked, noticing the picture in Maya's hands. She quickly placed it back on the shelf, her heart still pounding. "Nothing," she said, forcing a smile. Richard raised an eyebrow, but didn't press her further. Instead, he walked over and sat beside her on the couch. "How's everything going?" he asked gently. Maya hesitated. She had been holding on to the question ever since she found the picture, but now it felt like the right time to ask. "Who is Ruth?" she asked softly, her eyes looking up at him. Richard's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of something in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, as if he was weighing his words. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet. "Ruth was someone who meant a lot to me. She was," he paused, looking at the floor for a moment. "She was a friend, a close friend. A long time ago." Maya felt a pang of disappointment, but it wasn't what she had expected. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard's gaze lingered on the photo for a moment before he looked back at Maya. "She passed away several years ago. It was sudden. I never got the chance to say goodbye." Maya absorbed his words slowly, trying to make sense of everything. Ruth had been important to him, but that still didn't explain the strange feeling she had. "I think she's someone who might have known my mom," Maya said, more to herself than to Richard. Richard looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" Maya took a deep breath, trying to put her thoughts into words. "My mom? She used to talk about a woman who helped her once, a long time ago. I don't know the details, but she mentioned someone named Ruth. Could it be the same person?" Richard sat up straighter, his eyes widening slightly as he processed her words. "Ruth helped your mother?" he asked, his voice suddenly intense. Maya nodded, still unsure. "I think so. I don't know for sure, but it feels like it could be the same person." Richard's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maya, I had no idea. I never knew your mother and Ruth were connected. But if Ruth helped her, I can only imagine how much she meant to her." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Could this be true? Was there a connection between her mother and the woman in the photo? It felt like the pieces were starting to fall into place, but there were still so many questions. "Do you think?" Maya hesitated, unsure if she should even ask. "Do you think Ruth would have helped my mom if she knew what happened to us?" Richard looked at her, his eyes full of empathy. I think Ruth would have done anything she could to help your family, he said softly. She was that kind of person. Maya felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Ruth, this woman she had never met, had somehow been a part of her family's story. She had helped her mother, and now, through some strange twist of fate, Richard had become a part of their lives, offering them the help and care they needed. It was overwhelming, but in the best way possible. I wish I could have met her, Maya whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Richard gave her a sad smile. I think you would have liked her, he said. She was someone who believed in giving people second chances. Maya looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. She had been given a second chance, a chance she never thought she would have. And as much as she missed her mother, she knew that the life she was starting to build here, with Richard's help, was something she could never have dreamed of before. I don't know what the future holds, Maya said quietly, her voice steady now. But I do know that I'm not alone anymore. Richard's smile returned, warmer than before. You never were alone, Maya, he said softly. You just needed someone to help you find your way. The following week was filled with a mixture of routine and new experiences for Maya and Eli. The weight of their past seemed to lift little by little each day, replaced by the odd but comforting reality of their new life. Richard's offer of safety and care had transformed their world. The small house, once unfamiliar, was now a haven where they could simply be children again. They spent their days doing what kids should, playing, laughing, and learning without fear. Yet, the truth of their situation, how they had ended up here, remained in the back of Maya's mind. The question about her mother's past and her connection to Ruth lingered in her thoughts. The more she tried to push it away, the stronger the pull became. One afternoon, after school, Maya decided she needed to understand more about Ruth and what role she might have played in her mother's life. She found Richard in his office, going over papers. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening. What's on your mind, Maya? He asked, sensing something on her mind. She hesitated, but then she blurted it out. Do you have any more pictures of Ruth? I don't know why, but I need to know more about her. I feel like she's a part of my story. Richard put down his papers and leaned back in his chair. He regarded her for a long moment, as if deciding how to answer. Finally, he nodded. I think I have some, but I've never shown them to anyone. Ruth was a very private person. She didn't like attention. Maya felt her heart race. She needed to understand more about this woman who had touched her mother's life. She had to know if there was a connection between her family and Ruth's. Richard stood and walked over to a small drawer in the corner of the room. He pulled out a faded envelope and handed it to Maya. The envelope was old, its edges frayed, but the writing on it was unmistakable, Ruth's name. Maya carefully opened it, and inside was a stack of photographs. She ran her fingers over them gently, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. The first few pictures were of Ruth, smiling and laughing with different people. Then, a picture caught her attention, one of Ruth standing next to a younger version of her mother. Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was the same woman from the photograph Richard had shown her, the one with the smile she recognized. The woman who, it seemed, had been a part of her family's life long before Maya had understood what that meant. Maya turned the photograph over, and on the back was a single word written in Ruth's handwriting, family. The word hit her like a wave, and she struggled to hold back the tears. Richard watched her carefully, sensing the weight of the moment. Do you remember your mother talking about Ruth? He asked gently. Maya nodded, her eyes still fixed on the photo. She never said much. Just that Ruth helped her once when things were hard. But I never knew how. Richard stepped closer, his voice soft. Ruth helped many people, but I think she helped your mother in a way that few others would. Maya's mind raced. What had Ruth done? What had her mother been through? And why had this woman cared for them, even after she had passed away? Maya felt a deep need to understand the history between Ruth and her mother, something that might explain the strange connection she felt to this woman she had never met. Do you think Ruth would have helped us? Maya asked, her voice trembling. She helped me, Richard said. She helped a lot of people in her time. She was the kind of person who saw the good in everyone, even when others couldn't. And I think she would have done everything she could to help you, Maya. Maya looked up at Richard, feeling something shift inside of her. This was more than just a story about a woman from her mother's past. It was about a legacy of kindness, of people caring for others without expecting anything in return. Ruth had cared for her mother, and now Richard was caring for her and Eli. It was all connected, like a thread weaving its way through time. I never knew that, Maya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know my mom had someone like Ruth in her life. Richard nodded. It's a reminder that even when we feel lost, there's always someone out there who can help. Ruth believed in that, and I believe in that too. Maya looked down at the photograph again, her fingers brushing over the faded image of Ruth and her mother. She didn't know everything about Ruth, but she knew that she was part of something bigger. A family, not by blood, but by choice. A family built on kindness, compassion, and care. As she sat there, holding the photograph, Maya realized that Ruth's legacy was alive in the choices people made every day, including the choices Richard had made to help them. She had found more than just a new home. She had found a place where love and care were given freely, where the past and present were connected by the simple act of helping others. And for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she understood what it meant to be part of something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. With Eli by her side and Richard as a guide, Maya knew they were on a path to something better. And the memory of Ruth, the woman who had helped so many, would stay with them always, a quiet reminder of the power of kindness and the impact of giving without expecting anything in return. As the days passed, life in the new home began to feel more normal for Maya and Eli. The initial shock of being in a warm, safe environment slowly faded as the comfort of routine set in. Maya still spent her mornings looking through the photographs of Ruth and her mother, trying to piece together the connection between them. But her curiosity shifted to something more immediate. She had a new life now, one where she didn't have to worry about survival, at least not in the way she used to. And yet, the memories of the past, the struggles they had faced, still clung to her like a shadow. Eli was the first to notice the shift in their world. He was still a child in many ways, but he seemed to adjust quickly to the luxury of having a roof over his head, food on the table, and time to just be a kid. Maya couldn't help but feel a little envious of his ability to embrace this new life so easily. But for her, the weight of their past wasn't so easily shed. It lingered, hidden beneath the surface, and she couldn't stop herself from wondering what would happen next. One afternoon, after school, she sat by the window, watching as Eli ran outside to play with some of the other kids in the neighborhood. She didn't want to admit it, but she felt a pang of loneliness. Richard had been busy with his work, and while she appreciated everything he had done for them, there was still something unsettling about being in his home. He was kind, yes, but there was still a distance between them. She didn't feel like she truly belonged. She sighed and looked down at the photograph of Ruth again. Her mother had been a part of this story in some way. Ruth had helped her, and now Richard was helping them. But how much of their lives were tied to this man? How much of it had been planned? The thought made her uneasy. Just as she was about to get up, there was a knock at the door. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Richard had told them to settle in, but she wasn't sure who this could be. She opened the door cautiously, and standing there was a man she had never seen before. He was dressed in a suit, his face sharp and serious, but his eyes were kind. "Is Richard here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Maya stepped back, uncertain. "He's not home right now. Can I help you?" The man looked at her for a moment, as if considering whether to speak further. Finally, he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm a lawyer," he said. "I need to speak with Richard about the property." Maya's heart began to race. A lawyer? What did this have to do with them? She didn't know what to say. "I don't know when he'll be back," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The man nodded. "I'll wait for him." He walked past her and sat down in one of the chairs in the living room, pulling out a briefcase from under his arm. Maya stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Richard had told them that they were safe here, that no one could take this place away from them. But now, seeing this man standing in the middle of their home, her mind was filled with doubts. Was this all really as permanent as Richard had promised? Was someone trying to take it away? She glanced out the window to see if Eli was coming back, but he was still playing with the other kids. She took a deep breath and went to sit down across from the man. "What do you want with Richard?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt. The lawyer looked at her for a moment, as if weighing how to respond. "It's not what I want. It's what he needs to know," he said finally. "There are some legal issues regarding the property, and I'm here to handle them." Maya's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? She had heard of lawyers handling property, but she didn't understand what it had to do with them. She thought back to her conversations with Richard, how he had always seemed so certain that everything was fine. But now, she wasn't so sure. The man continued, unaware of the storm of thoughts brewing in her mind. Richard's property isn't as secure as he thinks, he said. There are some complications with the ownership. I've been tasked with sorting them out. Maya felt a cold wave of panic rush over her. Was this all going to fall apart? Were they going to lose this place, too? She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. What kind of complications? She asked. The lawyer looked at her, his expression unreadable. That's something I need to discuss with Richard. It's not something that concerns you at the moment. Maya's mind raced. She didn't understand any of this. How could things be falling apart when everything seemed so perfect? She had trusted Richard, and now, this man was here, talking about legal complications that she didn't understand. She stood up abruptly, her thoughts spinning. I don't know what this is about, but I don't want to hear it unless Richard is here. The lawyer didn't seem fazed. He simply nodded. I understand. I'll wait for him to arrive. Maya walked away, her mind still in a daze. She found herself pacing the living room, her thoughts a whirlwind. This wasn't just about a house. It was about everything she had come to rely on, everything she had started to believe in again. And now, this lawyer's words were making her question all of it. She couldn't lose this. She couldn't lose this chance at a new life, at safety, at belonging. She couldn't lose Eli. She couldn't lose everything. Just then, she heard the sound of the door opening, and Richard walked in. He paused when he saw the lawyer sitting in the living room. What's going on? He asked, his voice tense but calm. The lawyer stood up and walked toward him, his face unreadable. We need to discuss some legal matters about the property, he said. Richard's eyes flicked to Maya, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his gaze. It was quick, but it was there. A flash of something she couldn't quite place. She felt her heart race, and she wasn't sure what to do. Was this the moment everything would change? Would they lose it all? Would she lose him too? As Richard and the lawyer stood facing each other in the living room, Maya felt the room close in around her. Her heart raced as she watched the two men exchange glances, the lawyer's stern expression and Richard's unreadable face only adding to the tension in the air. It felt as though everything she had worked so hard to build, the safety, the peace, was hanging by a thread, and she was powerless to stop it. Richard took a deep breath and looked at Maya, who was standing in the doorway, her mind spinning. He could see the panic in her eyes, the way she was trying to make sense of the situation, and he knew she needed answers. Maya, why don't you sit down? He said, his voice soft but firm. Maya nodded and slowly moved toward the couch, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She couldn't stop her hands from shaking. The lawyer watched her carefully before turning back to Richard. We need to discuss the ownership of this property. There are legal issues that need to be addressed. Maya's mind whirled. Legal issues? What did that mean? What was going to happen to them? Was Richard going to lose everything, including the place that had become their sanctuary? Richard looked at Maya for a moment longer before turning his attention back to the lawyer. What kind of legal issues? He asked, his voice low but steady. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and opened his briefcase. It's a matter of inheritance, the lawyer explained. The property was left to you, Richard, but there are complications with the estate. Some documents were not properly filed, and there are disputes about the validity of the will. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Inheritance? A will? Richard's property had been left to him? She didn't understand. Why was this all happening now? Richard's face remained calm, but Maya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. I see, he said, his voice even. And what exactly do you want from me? The lawyer's gaze sharpened, but his tone remained neutral. We need to resolve these issues. There are financial matters to take care of, and until that's done, the property can't be fully secured. Richard nodded slowly, processing the information. And if I don't resolve this? The lawyer didn't hesitate. Then the property could be at risk. It could be taken from you if the legal matters aren't settled. Maya's heart sank. She glanced at Richard, who seemed to be deep in thought, his face a mask of concentration. She had never seen him like this before, so serious, so distant. She had always known him as the man who had helped them, who had offered them safety. But now, it felt like that safety was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do about it. Richard took a deep breath and stood up, walking toward the window. He stared out at the city, his back to the lawyer and Maya. "I don't need anyone to tell me what I have to do," Richard said quietly, his voice colder now. "I'll take care of it. I've dealt with things like this before." The lawyer nodded. "Of course, Mr. Richard. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the situation." There was a long silence, and Maya could feel the tension building in the room. Her mind raced with questions, but she didn't know what to ask. What did this mean for them? What would happen to her and Eli? "What happens now?" Maya finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. Richard turned to her, his expression softening. "Now we handle it. I'll speak with the necessary people and make sure everything is resolved. You and Eli don't need to worry about this." Maya looked at him, trying to understand. Was this really something they didn't need to worry about? Or was it all just a way to protect her from the truth? "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice small. Richard nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm sure. You both are safe here. I'll make sure of it." But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. If everything was really going to be okay, why did it feel like the ground was shifting beneath her? Why did the weight of the situation feel so heavy? Richard must have seen the uncertainty in her eyes, because he walked over to her and sat down beside her on the couch. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. "I know this is scary, Maya," he said, his voice quiet. "But I promise you, I'm not going to let anything happen to you or Eli. I'll fix this, I swear it." Maya nodded, trying to believe him. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay. But the uncertainty of the situation gnawed at her, and she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. The lawyer stood up, his briefcase in hand. "I'll leave you to work on this, Mr. Richard. Please let me know when you're ready to proceed." Richard nodded, his gaze hardening once again. "I will. Thank you." As the lawyer left the room, Maya sat still, trying to process everything that had just happened. She could feel the tension in the air, the sense that things were not as stable as she had hoped. The life she and Eli had started to build was fragile, and she wasn't sure how much longer it would last. Richard stood by the window for a moment longer, his back to her, before he turned and looked at her again. His expression was serious, but there was a hint of something softer in his eyes. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice quieter now. "But you and Eli are going to be okay. I'm going to make sure of it." Maya wanted to believe him. She really did. But for the first time since arriving here, she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her once more. Everything they had been given, everything that had started to feel like home, seemed uncertain now. As the day went on, Maya couldn't help but wonder if they would be able to hold on to this fragile life they had found. Would Richard be able to fix whatever had gone wrong? Or would this new life slip through their fingers, just as the last one had? Only time would tell. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Maya sat by the window, her thoughts a whirlwind, unable to shake the feeling that things were slipping out of her control. The lawyer had left, and Richard had assured her that everything would be sorted out, but the weight of his words hung over her. The property was at risk, and she could see the strain it was putting on him. She watched as he moved around the house, busy with phone calls, talking in low tones with people she couldn't hear, but the tension was palpable. There were times when he would pause, his hand resting on the back of a chair, lost in thought, before he would shake his head and continue with his work. He wasn't talking about the details, but Maya could tell he was struggling. It wasn't the same calm certainty she had seen when he first took them in. The cracks were beginning to show. Eli, in his innocence, had no idea what was going on. He was content playing outside, running around with the other kids, and enjoying the small freedoms of childhood he had never had before. Maya, on the other hand, felt trapped between the past and the future. The life she had left behind still clung to her. The hunger, the fear of never knowing when the next meal would come, the constant worry that the street would claim them again. And now, it seemed like she might lose it all. Maya had grown attached to this new life, to the sense of security Richard had given them, and the thought of losing it felt like a punch to the gut. But she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Richard's past, his ties to the property, were catching up to him. It wasn't just the lawyer's words. It was the way Richard seemed different now, as if he were carrying a weight that he couldn't share. One evening, after dinner, Maya decided she needed to know the truth. She had been patient enough, but it was time to confront Richard about everything. She found him in the study, looking over a stack of papers, his brow furrowed as he read. "Richard," she said, her voice steady but full of concern. He looked up at her, his expression softening when he saw the worry in her eyes. Maya, everything is going to be fine. Don't worry about this. But Maya wasn't convinced. I can't help it. I keep thinking, what if we lose everything? What if you lose this place, and we're back on the street again? Richard sat back in his chair, his face hardening for a moment before he exhaled deeply. He rubbed his temples, as though the weight of everything was finally getting to him. I won't let that happen, Maya, he said quietly. I've dealt with worse before. I will find a way to make this right. Maya's heart ached at the desperation in his voice. She knew he was doing his best, but she couldn't ignore the fear that had settled in her chest. But what if you can't? She asked, her voice trembling. What happens to us then? Richard stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her as he stared out at the darkening sky. I've made mistakes in my life, Maya, he said softly, his voice distant. Things I never thought would come back to haunt me. But I promised you that I would take care of you and Eli. And I will. No matter what happens with this property, I will make sure you both have what you need. Maya swallowed hard, her emotions overwhelming her. I don't want to go back to the way things were, she whispered. I don't want to lose you. Richard turned to face her, his eyes intense with emotion. You won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. For a moment, there was silence between them. Maya wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that everything would be okay, that Richard would find a way to fix whatever was wrong with the property. But the uncertainty was too much to bear. I'm scared, Richard, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how much longer I can pretend like everything is fine when it feels like it's falling apart. Richard walked over to her, his face softening. I know, Maya, and I'm sorry you're carrying this weight. But you have to trust me. I will fix this. We've come this far, and I won't let anything tear us apart. Maya nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. I want to believe you, she said, her voice shaking. But I'm afraid that if it all falls apart, we won't have anywhere to go. I won't have anyone to protect me and Eli. Richard reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. You have me, he said firmly. You have Eli, and that's all that matters. We're in this together. Maya closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the comfort of his words, but the weight of the situation still loomed large. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that everything would work out. But deep down, a part of her was terrified that she was clinging to something fragile, something that could break at any moment. The days that followed were filled with tension. Richard was gone more often, meeting with lawyers, making phone calls, doing everything he could to settle the legal issues that had surfaced. Maya tried to stay busy, helping with the house, taking care of Eli, but her mind never stopped racing. Every time she heard the sound of the door opening, her heart would jump in her chest. Was Richard back? Had he finally solved the problem? Or was this the moment everything would crumble? She kept her fear hidden, for Eli's sake, but it gnawed at her every day. One afternoon, as she was folding laundry, she heard the familiar sound of the door opening, and then Richard's voice calling her name. She rushed to meet him, her heart pounding. Maya, he said, his face serious but relieved. It's done. The legal issues have been resolved. The property is ours. Maya blinked, her breath catching in her throat. It's really ours? She whispered. Richard smiled, the tension finally easing from his shoulders. Yes, everything is settled. We're safe. Tears filled Maya's eyes as the weight of it all lifted from her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. They weren't going to lose this. They weren't going back to the street. And for the first time in a long time, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a future. Together. The days after Richard's announcement felt like a breath of fresh air. The weight that had been pressing down on Maya's chest lifted, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe in the future. The house, which had once felt like a fragile dream, now felt like a solid reality. Eli was still running around the yard, his laughter echoing through the air, and Maya found herself smiling more than she had in a long time. But even as life seemed to return to normal, there was an undercurrent of change. Richard was different. While he still took care of them, providing for their needs, his focus had shifted. He spent more time on the phone, meeting with people, handling business matters that Maya didn't fully understand. She noticed the late nights, the occasional tense conversations with lawyers, and the way he seemed to pull away from her and Eli, as though he were trying to protect them from something. One evening, As Maya sat at the kitchen table, Eli at her side, she caught sight of Richard through the window, standing in the garden, his posture rigid. His face was tense, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes, something that unsettled her. He was looking at the house, the place that had become their sanctuary, with a mixture of pride and apprehension. It made her uneasy. She stood and walked outside, her footsteps soft against the grass. She didn't want to disturb him, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was amiss. "Richard," she called gently, her voice quiet. He turned, his expression softening when he saw her. "Hey," he said, his tone warm, though there was still a hint of tension behind his words. "What's going on?" Maya asked, standing a few feet away from him. She watched him carefully, noticing the way his eyes darted toward the house before returning to her. "Just thinking," he replied after a moment. "About everything. About how far we've come, and how much still needs to be done." Maya's heart clenched. She had known that Richard's past was complicated, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Richard," she began, her voice tentative, "is everything really okay? I mean, with the house, with you?" Richard's gaze softened, and he took a deep breath. "Maya, I told you before, I'll take care of everything. You and Eli don't have to worry about anything. I want to make sure everything is secure, that nothing will threaten this life we're building." Maya stepped closer, her heart pounding. "But what's the real reason you're so worried?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he sighed and nodded. "There's something I haven't told you," he admitted, his voice low. Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her mind racing. Richard hesitated, as though trying to find the right words. "I've been working on securing this place, making sure everything is legally sound. But the property, there's a complication with it. Some of the documents aren't clear, and there's a risk that someone might come forward to challenge my claim to it." Maya felt a cold chill rush through her. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm saying that this place, our home, could be at risk. I've been trying to fix it, but it's not something I can do alone. And the more I look into it, the more I realize that there are things from my past that I should have dealt with a long time ago." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "You mean someone could take this away from us?" Richard nodded, his gaze distant. "It's possible. I don't want to scare you, but I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. If this isn't resolved, it could threaten everything we've worked for." Maya felt her stomach drop. The house, the safety, the stability they had come to rely on, everything felt so fragile now. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard stepped closer to her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I'm going to handle it. I'll make sure that we keep this place. No one is going to take it from us. I won't let that happen." Maya nodded, trying to calm the storm of emotions that was rising inside her. She wanted to believe him, she needed to believe him, but she couldn't shake the fear that had lodged itself deep in her chest. "We've come so far," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would do if we lost it all." Richard squeezed her shoulder, his eyes meeting hers with a look of determination. "You won't lose it, Maya. Not while I'm here." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Maya looked into Richard's eyes, searching for the certainty she needed, but all she saw was the same uncertainty that she felt inside. She wanted to trust him, she wanted to believe that everything would be okay, but the fear was too strong. "I don't want to lose Eli," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't want to lose this life we've started." Richard nodded. "And you won't. I promise you. I will do everything in my power to keep you and Eli safe. This is your home now, and I won't let anyone take that from you." Maya looked at him for a long moment, trying to gauge the sincerity in his words. She saw the resolve in his eyes, the promise he was making, and for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could make it through this. Maybe they could protect what they had. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll trust you." Richard smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "We'll get through this together." Maya nodded, but the doubts still lingered in her heart. She wanted to believe. In the future, wanted to believe that they had a chance. But as the sun set that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be much harder than either of them had imagined. The tension in the air had become almost unbearable. Maya had trusted Richard when he said he would handle everything. But as days turned into weeks, The uncertainty of their situation began to wear on her. She could see the toll it was taking on him, too. He was more withdrawn, spending long hours on the phone, meeting with lawyers, and looking through piles of paperwork. He had promised her that everything would be fine, but every time he looked at the legal documents, his expression seemed to darken. Maya tried to stay strong, but the fear of losing everything was starting to creep back into her mind. Eli, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued to play outside, running through the yard with the other kids, laughing and shouting, as though everything was perfectly normal. He still had the carefree spirit of a child who had no idea how fragile life could be. Maya envied him. She wanted to be like him, to feel safe and secure again, but the nagging worry that had settled in her chest wouldn't go away. One evening, after dinner, Richard sat with her in the living room. The light from the lamp next to them cast long shadows on the walls, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound that broke the silence between them. Maya had been waiting for this moment, the moment when she would have to ask the question that had been weighing on her for days. "Richard," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. He looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "What is really going on?" she asked, her heart pounding. "I know you've been working on this, but you haven't told me everything. And I can see it in your eyes. You're worried. What aren't you telling me?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time, he seemed to be struggling with how to answer. Maya's heart sank. She had been afraid of this moment, the moment when the weight of everything would be too much for him to handle alone. "I'm trying to protect you, Maya," he said finally, his voice low. "I promised you I would fix this, but the truth is, it's more complicated than I thought." Maya felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Richard looked at her, his face etched with worry. "The property, it's not just about the legal documents. There are people who want it. People from my past who think they have a claim to it, and they won't stop until they get what they think is theirs." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. "Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Richard's gaze hardened. "It's not something I wanted to burden you with. You've been through enough, Maya. I didn't want to scare you." He sighed and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But I should have been honest with you from the beginning. These people, they don't care about us. They don't care about you or Eli. They want what they believe is theirs, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." Maya's mind was racing. She had known there were challenges ahead, but this was different. She felt a wave of panic wash over her, the same feeling she had felt all those months ago, when she and Eli had been on the streets, unsure of where to go or what to do. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can we protect ourselves from people like that?" Richard's face softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "I'm not going to let them take this away from you. I won't let them take away your home, your safety. But I need your help. We're going to have to fight back, Maya." Maya looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about their lives, their future, and everything they had fought for. "How?" she asked. Richard met her gaze, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll take them to court. I have lawyers working on it. I'm going to make sure that they don't get what they want. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take everything I have to protect you." Maya nodded, her thoughts still a whirlwind. She wasn't sure how this would all play out, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't face this alone. She had to trust Richard, even if she wasn't sure what the future held. "I'm with you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "We'll fight together." Richard smiled, a faint, grateful smile, before he squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Maya. I couldn't do this without you." For a moment, the weight of everything seemed to lift. They were in this together, and no matter what happened, they would face it side by side. But even as Richard reassured her, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that their battle was just beginning. The past was catching up to them, and there were still so many unanswered questions. Who were these people from Richard's past? What did they want with the property? And, most importantly, what would happen if they couldn't stop them? As the days went on, the tension in the house grew. Richard continued his work with the lawyers, trying to get everything in order. Maya did her best to keep things normal for Eli, to shield him from the stress and uncertainty that hung over them. But it wasn't easy. Every time she saw Richard's tired face, every time he came home later than usual, her heart sank. She couldn't help but wonder if this was all too much, if they were about to lose everything. But for Eli's sake, she kept the doubts to herself. She had promised him that they were safe now. She had promised him that nothing would take them away from this life they had started. And she would do whatever it took to keep that promise. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house only grew. Maya had promised herself that she would stay strong, that she wouldn't let the weight of their situation break her. But it was hard. Richard's meetings with his lawyers seemed endless, and every time he came home, his face was tighter, more strained. He hadn't said much about the progress, but Maya could tell that things were far from settled. She still hadn't learned who these people were from Richard's past that were challenging his claim to the property. Every time she asked, Richard would brush it off, saying it wasn't important. But it was important. It was important to her because it felt like their lives were still hanging in the balance, fragile and precarious. She couldn't let go of the worry that this could all fall apart at any moment. The house had become a home to them, a safe place that they hadn't known in years. But it still didn't feel entirely secure. One evening, as Maya sat on the porch, watching Eli play with the other kids, Richard came outside, his eyes distant and tired. His hand was resting on the doorframe, as if he needed to steady himself. Maya could see that he had been working hard, but it was clear that the burden of everything was beginning to wear him down. "Richard," she said quietly, standing up to meet him, "is everything okay?" Richard looked at her for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if deciding how much to share. Finally, he let out a slow breath and nodded. "It's getting there, but there are still a few pieces to figure out. I don't want to drag you into all the details. You've been through enough." Maya didn't let him off that easily. "No, Richard," she said firmly. "You've been carrying this on your own for too long. I need to know what's going on. I need to understand what's happening. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when I know it's not." Richard's face softened, and he took a step toward her. "I don't want to burden you, Maya. I promised you I would take care of everything, and I intend to do just that. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about you and Eli too. If I lose this place, if we lose everything, I don't know what we'll do." Maya's heart twisted at the fear in his voice. It was the first time he had been this open with her, and it made her realize just how much pressure he had been under. He had been protecting them, shielding them from the reality of their situation, but it was clear now that he was breaking under the weight of it all. She reached out, her hand gently resting on his arm. "We're in this together, Richard. We've been through too much for you to try to protect me from this now. We'll face whatever happens, together." Richard looked at her for a long time, as though trying to decide whether he could trust her with the truth. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "There's a person from my past, someone who has always been a shadow over me. His name is Thomas. He's someone I've been running from for years. He's the one who wants to claim this property. He's got connections, and he's been making calls, trying to find a way to take what's mine." Maya felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had suspected that there was more to the story, but hearing Richard's words out loud made it all too real. "Who is he? Why does he want this place?" she asked, her voice shaking. Richard's expression hardened. "He's someone I used to work with, someone I trusted, and someone who betrayed me. We had a falling out years ago, and since then, he's been trying to ruin me. He's been trying to take everything I've worked for, and now he thinks he can use legal loopholes to take this house from us." Maya could see the anger in Richard's eyes, the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface. "He's the reason you've been so tense," she said, the pieces falling into place. Richard nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "He's the reason I've been so careful. I didn't want to drag you into this, but now I see there's no way around it. We're going to have to fight him, Maya, and it's not going to be easy." Maya took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling in. "How do we fight him?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Richard looked at her, his eyes softening. "We go to court. We fight back with everything we have. We use every legal resource at our disposal, and we make sure he can't take what's rightfully ours. But it's going to be a long battle. It's not going to be simple, and I can't promise it will be quick." Maya nodded. "We can do it," she said, her voice full of conviction. "We'll fight. For this house, for Eli, for our future." Richard's expression softened, and for a moment, she saw the vulnerability in him that he had been hiding for so long. "I never wanted to drag you into this, but now I see that I don't have a choice. You're right, Maya. We're in this together." He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm. "We'll fight, and we'll win. I promise you." As they stood there, hand in hand, Maya felt a sense of determination rise within her. She had spent so long being afraid of losing everything, but now, she was ready to fight for what was hers. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of clarity, of purpose. They were going to fight together, and no matter what happened, they would come out stronger on the other side. The days leading up to the court case were filled with both anticipation and dread. Maya and Richard spent every waking moment preparing. Richard worked tirelessly with his lawyers, poring over legal documents, making phone calls, and coordinating everything that needed to be done. Maya did her best to support him, but there was a weight on her chest that she couldn't shake. She had seen Richard at his best, offering them a safe haven, but now, she saw the cracks in the armor. The man who had taken them in, who had promised them a future, was fighting not just for his property, but for their very stability. Despite the uncertainty, Maya remained strong for Eli. She knew that if she faltered, he would sense it. He was too young to understand the intricacies of the battle, but he could feel the tension in the air. The house, once a symbol of their new beginning, now felt like a battlefield, one that could be ripped away at any moment. Eli didn't know the full extent of what was happening, and Maya was doing everything she could to shield him from the stress. He continued to play outside, running through the yard, blissfully unaware of the looming storm. But one afternoon, as Maya stood by the window watching him, a car pulled into the driveway. It was a sleek black vehicle, not one she recognized. Her heart skipped a beat. Richard was inside, still on the phone, but she could sense that something was about to change. As the car doors opened, Maya's stomach churned. Out stepped two men, both in dark suits, walking toward the house with purpose. Richard looked up from his phone just as they reached the front door. He seemed to brace himself before stepping forward to greet them. Maya stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She could see the tension on Richard's face as the two men exchanged words. She had seen that look before, the kind of look that told her trouble had arrived. The men didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Richard, we need to speak with you about the property," one of the men said, his voice deep and authoritative. Maya's stomach dropped. She could hear the weight of the words, the finality in them. Richard nodded, his expression hardening. "Of course," he said, his voice steady. "Please, come inside." The men walked into the house, their eyes scanning the room with a sense of entitlement. Maya felt a sudden surge of unease. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built, was hanging in the balance. Richard led the men into the living room, where Maya was still standing. He gave her a glance, a look that told her to stay calm. She nodded, but inside, her heart was racing. The two men sat down, their posture rigid. Richard stood beside them, his arms crossed, waiting for them to speak. The man who had spoken first cleared his throat before speaking again. "Mr. Richard, we've reviewed the documents. It's clear that there are significant issues with your ownership of the property. We have reason to believe that certain details were misrepresented, and we are here to resolve that." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Misrepresented? What did that mean? Were they going to take the house away from them? She glanced at Richard, but he remained calm, his eyes focused on the men in front of him. "I'm aware of the situation," Richard said evenly, his voice never wavering. "But I assure you, this property belongs to me. I have every right to it." The men exchanged a brief look before the second man spoke. "We believe otherwise, Mr. Richard. There are discrepancies that we can't overlook. If we proceed with legal action, the consequences could be severe." Richard's jaw tightened. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "You're wasting your time. I will fight you in court if I have to. You won't take this property from me." The two men seemed unfazed by his words. They simply sat back, exchanging glances before turning their attention back to Richard. "Very well," the first man said, his tone condescending. "But know this. If you continue to resist, it will not end well for you. We will expose everything. Your entire history, your business dealings, everything will be brought into question." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. The threats were becoming more direct, more dangerous. She couldn't understand why this was happening. Richard had built everything from the ground up, and now it was being threatened by people from his past. She had to speak up. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. The men looked at her, surprised by the interruption, but they didn't respond. Richard turned to her, his expression softer now. as if trying to protect her from the weight of it all. "Maya, stay calm," he said quietly. "I'm handling this." Maya nodded, but inside, the fear continued to grow. She wanted to believe Richard when he said everything would be fine, but the pressure was building, and she couldn't ignore the possibility that they might lose everything. The men stood up, clearly satisfied with the tension they had created. "We'll be in touch," the first man said, his voice cold. "And we expect full cooperation. If you want to avoid a lengthy and public battle, I suggest you think carefully about your next steps." With that, they turned and walked out of the house, leaving Richard and Maya alone. The moment they left, Maya couldn't hold back any longer. She collapsed onto the couch, her hands trembling. "Richard, what are we going to do?" she asked, her voice breaking. Richard stood motionless for a moment, his face hardening as he processed the meeting. "We fight back," he said, his voice full of resolve. "We've come this far, and I'm not going to let anyone take this away from us. Not now, not ever." Maya looked at him, seeing the strength in his eyes. It gave her a sliver of hope, something she desperately needed in this moment of uncertainty. She stood up, walking over to him, and took his hand in hers. "We'll fight together," she said, her voice steady now. "We'll fight for this. For our future." Richard smiled at her, the weight of the world still on his shoulders, but softened by her support. "Together," he said, squeezing her hand. And in that moment, Maya realized that no matter how hard the battle ahead might be, they weren't alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed to face whatever came. Next, days passed, and the pressure on Richard and Maya only intensified. They had hoped that after the lawyer's visit, things might settle down. But instead, it felt like the storm had just begun. Richard had become more distant, as if the weight of everything was beginning to crush him. His work on the legal front had been relentless, and even though he continued to assure Maya that everything was going to be fine, she could see the toll it was taking on him. He was no longer the man who had walked in with confidence, offering them a safe place. Now he was a man in survival mode, always thinking 2 steps ahead, looking over his shoulder for the next threat. Maya did her best to hold everything together, but she could feel herself unraveling, too. She had promised herself that she would stay strong for Eli, that she wouldn't let him see how worried she was, but some nights it was all she could do not to break down. Eli had no idea what was going on. He continued to play outside, unaware of the mounting danger. His laughter was the only sound of innocence in the house, and Maya clung to that sound as if it were a lifeline. On one particularly quiet evening, Richard finally came home after a long day of meetings. He was exhausted, his suit wrinkled and his face drawn. He had been up since dawn, dealing with the latest round of threats and challenges from Thomas's people. The exhaustion was starting to show, and Maya could see the deepening lines on his face. "Richard," Maya said, her voice tentative as she looked up from the kitchen table where she was preparing dinner. "You're home late again. I've been thinking, maybe it's time we do something more. We can't just keep waiting for things to fall apart." Richard stopped in the doorway, his eyes flicking to her. There was a moment of silence before he let out a long sigh, rubbing his eyes as if to wipe away the exhaustion that had built up. "I don't want to drag you into this any more than I already have," he said quietly, stepping further into the room. "But it's getting worse. The more I try to fight back, the more Thomas and his people are pushing." Maya stood up, her face hardening with resolve. "I'm not asking to be protected anymore. I'm in this with you, Richard. We have to fight back, and we need to do it now, before they take everything from us." Richard looked at her, his eyes softening with a mix of pride and something else, something deeper. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice filled with both caution and admiration. "This isn't a small fight. We're going up against powerful people. Thomas isn't just some businessman with a grudge. He has connections that can make this ugly." Maya stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't care about how ugly it gets. I care about our future. I care about Eli. I won't sit here and wait for them to come in and take it all away from us." Richard's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, she saw a glimpse of the man she had first met, the man who believed in doing the right thing no matter the cost. "You're right," he said, his voice steady now. "We can't keep playing defense. It's time to take action." Maya felt a surge of relief flood through her. She wasn't alone in this. Together, they would fight, and together, they would win. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Richard and Maya met with new lawyers, people who were willing to take the fight to court and expose Thomas's efforts to take their home. They gathered all the documents they could, digging through past records, finding holes in Thomas's claims. Maya worked alongside Richard, her hands shaking as she sifted through piles of paperwork, but she didn't stop. She knew that this was their only shot. Eli, who had been growing more curious about what was going on, started asking questions. "Why are you always talking to people on the phone, Dad?" he asked one night after dinner. Richard smiled, though there was a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. "Just taking care of some business, buddy. Don't worry about it." Eli nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and returned to his toys. But Maya could see the worry in his eyes, the way he watched them both so closely. He might not understand the full scope of what was happening, but Maya could see the weight in his small shoulders. As the legal battle continued, it became clear that Thomas wouldn't back down. The pressure on Richard intensified, and the threats grew more personal. Maya knew that if they didn't act quickly, they might lose more than just the house. They could lose everything: the life they had built, the safety they had fought for. One evening, after another long day, Richard came home with troubling news. He looked at Maya with the kind of look she had been dreading. "They've started spreading rumors," he said quietly, his eyes dark with concern. "Thomas is trying to discredit me. He's telling people I'm not who I say I am. He's even reached out to people I thought I could trust." Maya's heart dropped. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's face was hard. "It means they're going to stop at nothing. They'll try to turn the world against me. They'll try to make me look like the villain." Maya's chest tightened with fear. "What do we do?" Richard looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. "We keep fighting. We expose the truth, no matter what it takes. And we make sure Eli doesn't see the worst of it. I won't let them break us." Maya nodded, her resolve strengthening. She wasn't going to let Thomas win. No matter how hard it got, no matter how much they had to sacrifice, she would stand by Richard. They would stand together, and they would protect what they had built. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Maya felt like they had a fighting chance. She would no longer wait in fear. She would take back control of her life, and she would make sure that Eli's future was safe. Together, they would fight, and together, they would win. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also with resolve. Richard and Maya had a plan now, and they were committed to seeing it through. They spent every waking moment preparing for the court battle that loomed ahead. Richard had been relentless in his efforts to gather evidence, meet with lawyers, and stay one step ahead of Thomas's legal team. But despite all the progress, the weight of the situation was starting to feel unbearable. Maya knew Richard was doing everything he could, but she couldn't help but feel the fear creeping back. She had grown accustomed to the safety they had found in the house, and now that safety was at risk, the idea of losing it all was more than she could bear. Eli, still unaware of the full gravity of the situation, continued to play outside with his new friends, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. Maya envied him in those moments. He could still find joy in the simple things, in the freedom of being a child. Maya wished she could do the same. She tried to keep things normal for him, but it wasn't easy. Every time Richard came home, there was a visible tension in his eyes, a weariness that never seemed to fade. She knew he was fighting with everything he had, but she couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on him. It was one evening, after yet another long day, that Maya decided she could no longer stay silent. She had to confront Richard about her growing fears, about the way things were slipping through their fingers. She couldn't sit by and watch him carry this burden alone any longer. She found him sitting on the porch, staring out into the night, his face tense. The warm light from the house spilled out, casting a glow around him, but it did nothing to soften the heaviness that seemed to hang in the air. "Richard," Maya said, walking up behind him. He turned to look at her, his expression softening when he saw her standing there. "Maya, I didn't hear you come out here." She sat down next to him, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath before speaking. "We need to talk." Richard sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I know. I've been trying to protect you from all of this, but it's hard to keep it all in. I didn't want you to have to worry, but I see the way it's affecting you." Maya turned to him, her eyes searching his. "I'm not worried about me, Richard. I'm worried about us. About everything we've built here. What if we lose it all? What if I lose you?" Richard's eyes softened, but there was a hint of sadness in his gaze. I won't let that happen, Maya. I can't promise it will be easy, but I won't let them take this from us. Maya felt her chest tighten. I want to believe you. I do. But every time I see you like this, I wonder if you really can win this fight. I wonder if you're doing all this for nothing. Richard's jaw tightened, and he looked away for a moment, as if wrestling with the emotions inside him. I know this isn't easy for you. It's not easy for me either. But I'm doing this because I can't let you and Eli go through what I went through. I'm doing this because I made a promise, and I intend to keep it. Maya reached for his hand, holding it tightly. I know you're trying your best. I see that. But I'm afraid. I'm afraid of losing you, of losing this life we've built. Richard looked at her, his expression softening, and for the first time in a long while, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. Maya, I'm scared too. But we can't let fear control us. We have to fight. We have to keep pushing, no matter what. Maya nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She knew he was right. They couldn't let fear dictate their future. They had already lost so much, and they couldn't afford to lose this chance at a new life. They had to keep fighting, together. We'll fight, Maya said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. We'll do this, Richard. For Eli. For us. Richard squeezed her hand, his grip firm. Together, he said, his voice full of resolve. The next few days were filled with even more urgency. Richard and his team of lawyers worked tirelessly, preparing for the court case. Every time Maya saw him, he looked more worn down, more exhausted, but there was also a fire in his eyes, a determination that refused to fade. He wasn't going to let Thomas win. They weren't going to lose everything. Maya joined him in the preparations, helping wherever she could. She met with the lawyers, sorted through documents, and made sure Eli stayed occupied. It was hard, but it was also empowering. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she was contributing, like she was part of the fight. But as the case drew closer, the stakes grew higher. The pressure was palpable, and every conversation with the lawyers felt like a countdown. It wasn't just the property at risk anymore, it was everything. Richard's past was coming back to haunt him, and there was no escaping it. Maya knew that the fight ahead would be brutal. But as the day of the court hearing approached, she realized that there was no turning back. They had no choice but to face it head-on. As the night before the hearing arrived, Maya and Richard sat together on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that they were in this together. Tomorrow is going to be hard, Richard said quietly, breaking the silence. But we have to stay strong. For each other. For Eli. Maya nodded, her eyes fixed on the stars above. We will, she said, her voice steady. We'll get through this. Together. And in that moment, with the weight of the world pressing down on them, Maya knew that they had already won. No matter what happened in court, they had each other. They had a family. And that was something no one could take away. The night before the court hearing, Maya found herself awake long after the others had gone to sleep. The house was quiet, the only sounds the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of the city. She sat in the dim light of the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in her mind. Tomorrow was the day they had all been waiting for. Tomorrow, they would face Thomas and his lawyers. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. The fear was overwhelming. She tried to focus on the small things, Eli's laughter earlier that day, Richard's reassuring words, the warmth of the house. But her thoughts kept spiraling back to the possibility of losing everything. Maya knew how much this meant. The house, the safety, the life they had begun to build. It was all at risk, and she couldn't ignore the looming uncertainty. Richard had told her not to worry, but she could see the strain in his eyes. She knew he was doing everything he could, but she could also see that he was exhausted. The weight of the fight had become too much for him to carry alone. Maya had promised herself that she would stay strong, that she would be there for him. But tonight, alone with her thoughts, she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it all together. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights were dim, the streets quiet, and for a moment, everything felt far away. She wished she could turn off her mind, shut out the fear, the worry, the endless what-ifs. But she couldn't. The future was uncertain, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the fear that gripped her chest. Just then, she heard a soft knock on the door. Maya's heart skipped a beat, and she turned quickly, startled by the unexpected sound. She hesitated for a moment, wondering who it could be at this hour. Richard had been in his office, preparing for the hearing, and Eli was fast asleep. She opened the door cautiously, only to find Richard standing there, his expression serious but soft. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Maya stepped aside, her heart racing. She hadn't expected him to come in at this hour. "Of course," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Richard walked in and closed the door behind him, his face tired but gentle. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her with a quiet understanding in his eyes. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed him, how much she needed his reassurance. They had been through so much together, and the thought of facing this battle alone was terrifying. "I'm sorry I've been distant," Richard said after a long silence, his voice filled with regret. "I know you've been carrying so much, and I haven't been the support you need. I've been so focused on the case that I've forgotten to check in with you, to really be here for you." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She had been trying so hard to stay strong, to keep everything together, but the truth was, she was scared. She was scared of losing him, scared of losing everything they had worked so hard for. "It's not your fault," she said softly. "I know you're doing your best. Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard. "I'm scared, Richard. I'm scared that we're going to lose this, that I'm going to lose you." Richard stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached out, taking her hands in his grip warm and steady. "You're not going to lose me," he said firmly. "We're in this together. No matter what happens tomorrow, we're going to face it as a team. You and me. And Eli. We're family, and nothing can break that." Maya's heart swelled with emotion. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "I don't want to lose this, Richard. I don't want to lose our home, our life." Richard smiled gently, his thumb brushing against her hand in a soothing gesture. "I know, and you won't. I promise you. We'll fight this. We'll get through it. Together." Maya nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of emotions. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, with Richard by her side, she felt a little less afraid. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least they weren't facing it alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "For everything." Richard leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll always be here for you, Maya. Always." They stood there for a moment, holding each other, finding comfort in the shared silence. Outside, the night was still, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. Tomorrow, everything would change. The court case, the fight for their future, it all came down to tomorrow. But Maya knew that whatever happened, she and Richard would face it together. They had already survived so much, and now, they had a chance to fight for what they had built. The next morning, Maya woke up early, her mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming hearing. Richard was already up, his expression focused as he prepared for the day. Eli was still asleep, unaware of the gravity of the situation, and Maya was thankful for that. She didn't want him to carry the burden of this fight. She wanted him to stay innocent, to stay safe, and to keep his heart light. "You ready?" Richard asked, glancing over at her as she walked into the kitchen. Maya nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready." The battle wasn't over yet, but together, they had a chance to make sure they didn't lose everything. Together, they could fight for their future. And that was enough for now. The court hearing arrived, and the weight of it settled heavily on Maya's chest. The day had come. The day when their future would be decided, when everything they had fought for would either be secured or ripped away. Maya had barely slept the night before. The fear and anxiety had kept her awake, her mind racing with possibilities. What if they lost? What if everything crumbled? She couldn't let herself think about it too much, not with Eli so close by, his innocent face unaware of the magnitude of the battle they were about to face. Richard, too, had seemed distant. Maya had noticed the way his eyes were always tired, the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of the fight. She knew he had been doing everything he could, but she also saw the cracks. He was exhausted, and the pressure was wearing on him. Yet, through it all, he had remained strong for them, pushing forward even when the road ahead seemed impossible. Maya stood by the window, watching the first light of day break over the horizon. The house was still and quiet, a calm before the storm. She felt a sense of dread in the pit of her stomach, but she also knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened in that courtroom, they had come too far to give up now. Richard came into the room, his face a mask of calm, but Maya could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness in his eyes. He had always been the one to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But today, the uncertainty was clear on his face. He walked over to her, standing silently behind her for a moment before speaking. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft. Maya turned to face him, her heart pounding. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm going to fight. For you. For Eli. For us." Richard nodded, his expression softening. "We've got this, Maya. We've come this far. We just need to hold on a little longer." Maya gave him a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything was going to work out. But the fear still gnawed at her, the uncertainty that lingered in her chest. "I'm scared, Richard," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I'm scared that we won't win. That we'll lose everything." Richard stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "I know, Maya. I'm scared too. But we can't let fear control us. We've already come so far, and we can't stop now." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her close. "No matter what happens today, no matter what the outcome is, we have each other. And that's what matters." Maya closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of comfort in his arms. She knew he was right. They had each other. And as long as they did, nothing else would matter. They could face whatever came their way. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with tension as Richard, Maya, and their lawyers walked inside. Maya could feel the eyes on them, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She kept her head high, her heart racing in her chest. They sat in the front row, waiting for the hearing to begin. Maya's fingers trembled as she clutched Richard's hand, her mind running through everything they had prepared. She knew what was at stake. This was more than just a house. It was their future. It was everything they had worked for. The judge entered the room, and the room fell silent. Maya's pulse quickened as she tried to steady her breathing. The hearing was long, the arguments from both sides filled with legal jargon and words that Maya barely understood. But she understood the stakes. She understood that Thomas, the man from Richard's past, was doing everything he could to take their home, to tear apart their lives. Maya watched as Richard spoke, his voice steady but filled with determination. She could see the fight in him, the unwavering resolve to protect them, to protect what they had built. He wasn't going to let Thomas win. He wasn't going to let them lose this fight. As the hearing continued, Maya tried to focus on the words being spoken, but her mind kept drifting back to the same question. What if they lost? What if everything they had worked for was taken from them? She glanced at Eli, who was sitting quietly next to her, his eyes wide and curious, unaware of the gravity of the situation. He still had that innocent look on his face, the face of a child who had no idea that their world could come crashing down in an instant. Maya wished she could shield him from it all, but she couldn't. They had to face this together. The moments dragged on, each passing second feeling like an eternity. But finally, after what seemed like hours, the judge called for a break. Maya exhaled, not realizing until then that she had been holding her breath. She glanced at Richard, who seemed just as tense as she felt. "It's not over yet," he said quietly, his voice low. Maya nodded, her heart still racing. She knew it wasn't over. Not yet. As the break ended and the court reconvened, Maya found herself bracing for what was to come. The final arguments were being made. Thomas's lawyers were doing their best to tear apart Richard's claims, but Richard stood strong, his defense unwavering. Maya could see the fire in his eyes, the passion with which he fought for their future. And in that moment, she knew they had a chance. It wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about their lives, their family, and the strength of their bond. The judge called for a final ruling. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she held her breath, waiting for the decision that would change everything. The room was deathly silent as the judge's gavel came down. "The court rules in favor of the defendant," the judge said, his voice final. "The property will remain with the defendant, and the claims made by the opposing party are dismissed." The room erupted into murmurs, but all Maya could hear was the pounding of her heart in her ears. She turned to Richard, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We won," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Richard smiled, a smile of relief and triumph, his eyes shining with emotion. "We won," he said softly, pulling her into an embrace. "We're safe, Maya. We're safe." Tears sprang to Maya's eyes as she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They had done it. They had won. And in that moment, with Richard's arms around her and Eli standing beside them, Maya knew that no matter what the future held, they had each other. And that was all they would ever need. The days following the court's ruling were a mix of relief and reflection. Maya could hardly believe it. They had won. They were safe. The house, the life they had fought so hard for, was theirs to keep. Richard had kept his promise, against all odds. Maya watched as he stood in the living room, staring out the window, the weight of the battle finally lifting from his shoulders. He had always been strong, but today, there was a quiet pride in him that she hadn't seen before. The tension that had gripped him for so long had finally started to fade, replaced by the calm of victory. Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude as she walked up to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. Richard turned, a small but genuine smile on his face. "We did," he replied, his voice filled with emotion. For a moment, they just stood there, taking in the significance of what had just happened. Their future was no longer in jeopardy. The legal battle was behind them, and they could finally start to rebuild and move forward. The stress that had weighed on Maya for so long began to slip away. It was as if a burden had been lifted from her chest, and she could finally breathe again. The world outside seemed brighter, the sun shining just a little bit more. "So what now?" Maya asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Richard smiled and nodded, as if the answer had been clear all along. "Now we live," he said simply. "We start living the life we've always wanted. Together." In the weeks that followed, life began to return to a sense of normalcy. The paperwork surrounding the court case was settled, and the property was officially secured. Richard's business, though still demanding, began to regain its momentum. Maya and Eli spent their days exploring the neighborhood, meeting new people, and settling into their new routine. It was as if the future had finally opened up to them, full of possibility. They still had their struggles, of course, but they were no longer defined by them. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she could breathe. She no longer had to worry about survival, about losing everything. She could focus on creating a life worth living. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was theirs. And that was enough. Richard, too, began to relax, letting go of the constant weight he had carried for so long. He still worked hard, still made the important decisions, but now he did it with a sense of ease that hadn't been there before. Maya could see it in the way he interacted with her and Eli. There was a lightness to him that hadn't existed during the height of the legal battle. The fear of losing it all had been replaced by the joy of what they had gained. The house was filled with laughter once again. Eli's energy, his joy, was contagious. He had made new friends, and the backyard had become his personal playground. He would race around, running through the grass, his laughter echoing through the yard, and Maya couldn't help but smile every time she heard it. It was a sound she hadn't heard in so long, a sound that reminded her of how far they had come. One evening, after Eli had gone to bed, Maya and Richard sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The evening sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air was warm, a soft breeze carrying the scent of fresh flowers. They sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace that had settled over them. "We've come a long way," Maya said, breaking the silence. Richard nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "We really have. I never thought we'd get here, but here we are." Maya turned to look at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't think I could have done it without you," she said softly. Richard turned to her, his expression gentle. "You didn't have to do it alone, Maya. You never did. We were in this together from the beginning." Maya smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. She had learned so much through this journey. About strength, about love, and about the power of never giving up. Together, they had faced so many obstacles, but they had come out stronger on the other side. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll never take that for granted." Richard took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Neither will I." For the first time in a long time, Maya felt truly at peace. They had been through so much, and yet, here they were, standing together, ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but she no longer feared it. She had Richard. She had Eli. And she had a home, a place where they could build their lives together. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And that was all they needed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its last golden rays across the sky, Maya sat back, feeling the warmth of the moment wash over her. The journey had been hard, but they had made it. Together. And as she looked at Richard, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together, just as they always had. The future was theirs to shape, and with each other by their side, they could do anything. The months after the court ruling passed in a blur of normalcy, one that felt both familiar and foreign to Maya. The victory had brought a sense of relief, yes, but it also left her with a quiet sense of gratitude for the peace they had now found. Richard was more relaxed. The weight of the legal battle finally lifted from his shoulders. Maya could see the difference in him. He smiled more, joked more, and he was more present with her and Eli. It was a sight she hadn't realized how much she had longed for until she saw it again. Eli, on the other hand, was thriving. He had become more comfortable in their new life, making friends, laughing without the fear that once clung to his every movement. Maya had never imagined that they would come so far. From the streets to this, secure, loved, and cared for, she couldn't help but feel incredibly fortunate. One weekend, as Richard prepared for another long work week, Maya found herself sitting on the porch, watching Eli run around the yard with his friends, his laughter echoing in the air. She felt at peace. It was a quiet kind of joy, the kind that came from seeing her son so happy, so free. She thought back to the long nights spent wondering what their future would look like, the fear that had kept her awake at night. And now, here they were, in a home they could finally call their own, with a future that was filled with possibilities. The road ahead wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like they could face whatever came next. Richard walked up behind her, a warm smile on his face as he sat down beside her. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "You're thinking about everything, aren't you?" he asked gently. Maya smiled, nodding. "I am. I can't believe how far we've come." Richard squeezed her hand, his eyes soft. "We've done it together. We fought for this. And now we get to enjoy it." Maya leaned against him, feeling the comfort of his presence. She knew the struggles weren't over. There would always be something to navigate. Life was never without its hurdles. But they had each other, and that was enough. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Richard kissed her forehead, the warmth of his lips a gentle reminder of the strength they had built together. "You don't have to thank me. You're the reason we made it through. You and Eli are my everything." Maya turned to look at him, her eyes filled with love. "We're a family," she said softly, "and that's all that matters." As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the yard, Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. They had come so far. The struggles of the past had shaped them, but they no longer defined them. They were stronger, closer, and ready for whatever life would bring. The life they had fought for was finally theirs. And Maya knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. They had fought through the hardest of times, and now they had the freedom to live without fear. To live with love, with purpose, and with hope. Together, they were unstoppable. And that was the most powerful thing of all.